One moment he was just another worker. The next he was fired for saving a man's life. But before Ethan Walker could even process losing everything, the ground began to shake. A fleet of black helicopters was descending, coming straight for him. Who were they? And what did they want with a warehouse worker? Hi everyone, welcome to Emma's Emotion Chronicles. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. I'd love to know where you watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below and let's see how far this story has traveled. Ethan Walker had never considered himself a hero. He was just a guy trying to get by, working long hours at Ridgeway Logistics, a massive shipping warehouse known for its relentless pace and no-nonsense policies. 6 years in, he had learned that management only cared about one thing: efficiency. Still, he took pride in his work, showing up before dawn, handling the toughest shipments and staying late when no one else would. The work was brutal, the pay was average, but it was stable. And in a world where stability was hard to come by, Ethan wasn't about to complain. Until everything changed in an instant. The shift had been like any other: fast-paced, grueling, and noisy. Forklifts beeped, conveyor belts hummed, and men shouted over the din of machines. Ethan was in the middle of loading a pallet when he heard the sound of someone hitting the floor. Hard. He turned just in time to see one of his coworkers collapse near the belt. The guy, Dan, one of the older workers, had slipped on an unmarked oil spill, his head cracking against the concrete. Blood seeped from a gash near his temple, his body motionless. Without hesitation, Ethan dropped everything. Rushing over, he bent down and checked Dan's pulse. Weak but there. The man's breathing was shallow, his face pale. Ethan tore off his jacket and pressed it against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Someone call 911, he shouted. But in the chaos of the warehouse, no one noticed. Finally, a supervisor spotted them and radioed for help. Ethan stayed by Dan's side, holding pressure on the wound, speaking to him, keeping him conscious until the paramedics arrived. When the EMTs loaded Dan onto a stretcher, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. The guy was hurt, but he would make it. That was what mattered. Or so he thought. Minutes later, Ethan was pulled into the supervisor's office. Mr. Carlisle, the floor manager, was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You know why you're here?" Carlisle asked, flipping through some paperwork. Ethan frowned. "Because I helped a guy who was bleeding out on the floor?" Carlisle sighed, rubbing his temples like this was an inconvenience. "You left your post during peak hours. You stopped production for 12 minutes. That's a violation of company policy." Ethan blinked. He had worked here for 6 years. Never missed a shift. Never slacked off. And now, because he had helped a man who was bleeding out, they were firing him? "You can't be serious," Ethan muttered. "It's nothing personal," Carlisle said, sliding a termination form across the desk. "You know how it is. We have rules." Ethan stared at the paper. His hands clenched into fists. He had worked his entire adult life breaking his back for this company, and the second he did something human, he was disposable. That night, he sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the termination letter. Rent was due in 2 weeks. His bank account wouldn't last a month. He had nothing. Until the next morning when the ground began to shake. At first he thought it was construction. Then he heard a deep rumbling hum. Ethan stepped onto his porch. His blood ran cold. A fleet of black helicopters was descending, heading straight for him. Yesterday he was just another worker. Today billionaires are landing helicopters outside his house. When Ethan Walker saved a man's life, he had no idea who he was helping. Now Robert Langford, the CEO of one of the world's biggest corporations, is standing on his doorstep with an offer that could change everything. But one question remains. What's the catch? Ethan stood frozen on his porch, his heart hammering as the thundering rotors of the helicopters filled the sky. His sleepy neighborhood had never seen anything like this. The few neighbors who were outside stopped what they were doing, staring in confusion as the fleet of black helicopters descended toward his tiny one-bedroom rental. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered under his breath. The choppers hovered for a few seconds before 3 of them landed in the empty lot across the street. Dust and debris swirled into the air, making it difficult to see. The noise was deafening, but the shock of the moment kept him rooted in place. Then the doors opened. Men in dark suits and earpieces stepped out first, moving with calculated precision. They scanned the area before one of them motioned toward the helicopter. Moments later, a tall, imposing man in a tailored navy suit emerged. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and he moved with the kind of confidence that screamed power. Whoever he was, he wasn't here for a casual visit. Ethan swallowed hard as the man locked eyes with him and started walking straight toward him. By now the entire block was watching. A few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. A kid across the street pulled out his phone to record. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Yesterday he was unemployed and struggling to figure out his next move. Now he had a convoy of corporate helicopters outside his house and a man in a $5,000 suit approaching him like he was someone important. Nothing about this made sense. Before Ethan could speak, the man stopped a few feet in front of him and extended a hand. "Ethan Walker?" His voice was smooth, firm, but not unkind. Ethan hesitated before shaking his hand. "Yeah, that's me." The man nodded, eyes sharp with assessment. "My name is Robert Langford. I'm the CEO of Langford Industries." Ethan blinked. That name was big. Langford Industries wasn't just some random company. It was one of the largest corporate conglomerates in the country, running everything from technology to logistics. "Okay," Ethan said slowly. "And what does Langford Industries want with me?" Langford didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to one of his men, who handed Ethan a thick envelope. "Inside is a formal offer along with some additional information," Langford said. "But before you open it, let me explain why I'm here." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Yesterday you saved a man's life," Langford said, his gaze unwavering. "That man is my younger brother." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Dan, the guy he had helped at the warehouse. That was Robert Langford's brother?" "I don't understand," Ethan muttered. "I just did what anyone else would have." Langford held up a hand, stopping him. "No, you didn't. Do you know how many people walked past him before you stepped in? Do you know how many ignored the situation, choosing efficiency over human life?" His expression darkened. "You were the only one who acted. And that tells me everything I need to know about you." Ethan didn't know how to respond. His mind reeled. Yesterday he had been fired for helping Dan. And now Dan's billionaire brother was standing on his doorstep, offering him something. Langford motioned toward the envelope in Ethan's hands. "Inside that offer is something that could change your life, Ethan. But it's up to you whether you open it or not." Ethan exhaled slowly, his fingers gripping the thick paper. Whatever was inside, it was bigger than anything he had ever expected. Yesterday he was unemployed. Today he's holding a contract worth more than he's ever dreamed of. But this isn't just a job offer. This is a mission. Billionaire Robert Langford doesn't need another executive. He needs someone who knows what it's like to be overlooked, overworked, and discarded. The question is Ethan ready to step into a world where his decisions could change everything? Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he turned the envelope over in his grip. The weight of it felt heavy, literally and figuratively. He swallowed hard, his mind racing with 100 questions. "This has to be a joke," he muttered under his breath. Robert Langford, CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the country, had just landed a fleet of helicopters outside his house to personally hand him an offer? For what? Because he helped a guy when no one else did? Nothing about this felt real. His hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Langford studied him carefully before speaking again. "I understand this is overwhelming," he said, his tone surprisingly calm. "Take a moment. Process it. But I wouldn't be here if I wasn't serious, Ethan." Ethan glanced up at him, still trying to read between the lines. What was the catch? Nothing in life was free, especially not when it involved billionaire CEOs and corporate helicopters. He let out a slow breath and finally broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a contract. A thick stack of paper, printed on high-quality parchment. He flipped through the first few pages, skimming the text. His stomach nearly dropped when he saw the numbers at the bottom. A starting salary that dwarfed anything he had ever made. Full benefits. Relocation assistance. A 6-figure signing bonus. This can't be real," Ethan stammered. "I was making $18 an hour last week. And you're offering me this?" Langford nodded. "Yes. And it's non-negotiable." Ethan looked up sharply. "Why me? I'm not some executive, I'm not a corporate guy. I worked in a warehouse, for God's sake." Langford folded his arms, his piercing gaze unwavering. "Exactly. That's why you're the right person for this job. Ethan frowned, flipping through the contract again. He skimmed past legal jargon and corporate nonsense until he landed on the job title. Director of Workplace Integrity and Safety, Langford Industries Logistics Division. What even is this? Ethan asked, confused. Langford exhaled, clasping his hands behind his back. Let me explain. He took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. When my brother collapsed, do you know how many reports I received about that warehouse? He asked. Do you know how many violations, ignored complaints, and overlooked injuries I found in just 24 hours? He shook his head, disgusted. The people running that place didn't care. Not about the workers. Not about safety. Not about human decency. But you did. Ethan was silent, absorbing the weight of those words. I need someone inside my company who understands what it's like to be on the ground, Langford continued. Someone who knows what it's like to be undervalued, overworked, and treated like a cog in a machine. I need someone who won't look the other way when things go wrong. Ethan scoffed. So what? You want me to be your corporate watchdog? Langford smirked. I prefer oversight specialist. But yes, that's exactly what I want. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This was too much. A day ago he had been jobless and uncertain of his future. Now he was being handed a high-paying executive role in a Fortune 500 company. I don't get it, Ethan admitted. Why do you even care? You're a billionaire. Guys like you don't care about workers like me. Langford's expression darkened. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Ethan. I wasn't always a billionaire, Langford said quietly. I started out here in towns like this. My father worked in a warehouse just like Ridgway. And do you know how he died? Ethan hesitated, then slowly unfolded the paper. It was an old newspaper clipping. A story about a factory accident. A man had died due to negligence. Langford's last name was in the article. Ethan exhaled sharply. He finally understood. I don't want history to repeat itself, Langford said. And I think you're the guy who can help me make sure it doesn't. Ethan looked down at the contract in his hands. For the first time since this all started, he was actually considering it. He thought it was just a job offer. He was wrong. Ethan Walker isn't being hired for a paycheck. He's being handed the power to change the lives of thousands of workers just like him. Billionaire Robert Langford isn't looking for another executive. He's looking for someone who knows the struggle firsthand. The question is, will Ethan step up or will he walk away from the chance to make a real difference? Ethan sat down on the steps of his porch, gripping the contract in his hands. His thoughts raced. Just 24 hours ago he had been fired, discarded like he meant nothing. Now he was holding a life-changing offer from one of the richest men in the country. His eyes flicked back to the old newspaper article. It was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but the story was clear. Langford's father had died in a warehouse accident, just like the one at Ridgway. That's why you care, Ethan muttered, looking up at Langford. The CEO gave a slow nod. That's why I care. Ethan had never imagined that a billionaire would have any connection to his world. He had assumed that men like Langford were born into luxury, untouchable, unconcerned with the struggles of the working class. But now he saw it differently. Langford wasn't just offering him a job. He was offering a mission. I need people on my team who understand what it's like to be in the trenches, Langford said. People who aren't afraid to speak up. The executives at the top don't know what it's like to be you. That's why they make the decisions they do, because no one in their position has ever lived it. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He knew Langford was right. How many times had he watched corporate leaders make decisions that made life harder for the workers? How many times had people gotten hurt because of a policy written by someone who had never stepped foot in a warehouse? Langford's voice softened. I read your file, Ethan. 6 years at Ridgway. No sick days, no complaints. Always first to step up when something went wrong. He crossed his arms. You're not just some warehouse worker. You're a leader. You just haven't been given the right platform yet. Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. I don't know the first thing about corporate life, Langford. I don't even own a suit. Langford chuckled. Then we'll get you one. But that's not what matters. I can teach you corporate strategy. I can give you advisors and mentors. What I can't teach is the thing you already have. The instinct to do the right thing when it matters most. Ethan looked down at the contract again, flipping through the pages. The numbers were staggering, but that wasn't what had him second-guessing. This wasn't just a job. This was a chance to actually make a difference. So what exactly would I be doing? He asked cautiously. Langford nodded toward one of his men, who handed Ethan another file. Inside was a list of every warehouse owned by Langford Industries. Hundreds of locations. You would oversee workplace integrity and safety for our entire logistics division, Langford explained. You'd be in the field, traveling, inspecting warehouses, talking to workers, finding out what's really happening. And when you see something wrong, you bring it straight to me. No middlemen. No corporate filters. Ethan's stomach twisted. He would have the power to change things. He thought about all the times he had seen unsafe conditions ignored. All the times workers had been brushed aside, told to just deal with it. And now, he had a chance to actually do something about it. Langford must have sensed his hesitation because he took a step closer. His voice was calm but firm. This isn't just about you, Ethan. Think about every guy working in a warehouse right now, breaking his back for a company that doesn't value him. If you take this job, you could be the reason that changes. Ethan swallowed hard. Everything in his life had led to this moment. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a calling. Ethan Walker just signed the deal of a lifetime. He went from an overlooked warehouse worker to a man with the power to change the system. But there's no time to celebrate because his new life starts now. With just an hour to pack, Ethan is thrown into a world he's never known, where billionaires play by their own rules. The real question is he ready for what comes next? Ethan let out a slow breath, gripping the contract like it might disappear if he let go. He'd spent his whole life grinding, surviving paycheck to paycheck, doing thankless work in a system that never looked twice at people like him. Now he was standing on the edge of something completely different. But was he really cut out for this? I don't know, Langford, Ethan admitted, shaking his head. This is huge. I've never done anything like this. I mean, corporate meetings, business strategy. I wouldn't even know where to start. Langford didn't flinch. Instead, he studied Ethan with the same sharp gaze he'd had since the moment he stepped out of the helicopter. You know what your problem is? He said, voice steady. You're thinking like a guy who's still waiting for permission to step up. But here's the thing. You already proved yourself the moment you saved my brother's life. That wasn't just instinct, Ethan. That was leadership. Ethan felt the weight of those words. Leadership. No one had ever called him that before. For years he had been the guy everyone relied on but never promoted. He had trained new hires, covered extra shifts, cleaned up messes. But no one had ever offered him more than an occasional good job. Now, a billionaire CEO was standing in front of him, offering him a seat at the table. I get it, Langford continued. You're afraid you'll fail. That's normal. But let me ask you something. What happens if you say no? What's your next move? Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He thought about it. His old job at Ridgeway was gone. And even if he could find another warehouse job, it would be the same thing all over again. Low pay, brutal hours, no respect. A dead-end cycle. For years, Ethan had told himself that was just the way things were. That guys like him didn't get the big opportunities. But now here he was. And suddenly, saying no didn't feel like an option anymore. He exhaled sharply, looking Langford in the eye. You're really serious about this? Langford smirked. I wouldn't have sent 3 helicopters to your house if I wasn't serious. Ethan barked out a laugh. It was the first time he had laughed since this whole thing started. Then, without overthinking it, he grabbed a pen from his porch railing and signed the contract. As soon as the ink dried, Langford extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Ethan. Ethan shook it, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. His life had just changed forever. So when do I start? He asked, exhaling. Langford grinned. Right now. Pack a bag. The plane leaves in an hour. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Wait, what? Where are we going? Langford's smirk widened. To do what you do best. We're going to fix a broken system. Ethan didn't hesitate. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just following orders. He was stepping up to lead. And for the first time in years, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. One day you're scraping by. The next you're stepping off a private jet about to change an entire industry. Ethan Walker never imagined a billionaire would hand him the keys to a corporate revolution. But when he walks into a Chicago warehouse, where overworked employees have been ignored for years, he knows one thing. This is where everything changes. The system has been broken for too long, And he's here to fix it. Ethan barely had time to process what had just happened. One moment he was unemployed. The next he was boarding a private jet. Everything moved fast. By the time he grabbed a duffel bag and locked up his tiny rental, Langford's team had already arranged everything. A sleek black SUV whisked him away to the airstrip, where a luxurious private jet waited on the tarmac. Jesus, Ethan muttered as he stepped inside, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. Langford, already seated, smirked. Get used to it. As the plane took off, Ethan exhaled, gripping the armrest. He wasn't afraid of flying, he was afraid of everything that came next. All right, Langford, Ethan said, turning toward the CO. You said we were going to fix a broken system. Where exactly are we headed? Langford leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Chicago. One of our biggest distribution centers has been under review for months. There are reports of unsafe conditions, forced overtime, even injuries being ignored. We're about to walk in there unannounced. Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew places like that. How he had worked in places like that. And what am I supposed to do? Ethan asked. Langford smirked. You're going to show them why I hired you. The words sent a wave of adrenaline through Ethan's system. This wasn't just about walking into a boardroom. This was about standing up for the workers, the ones no one listened to. For the rest of the flight, Langford and his advisors briefed him on everything. Ethan took notes, absorbing every detail. By the time they landed, he wasn't just nervous anymore. He was ready. The Chicago warehouse was massive. A fortress of concrete, steel, and fluorescent lights. Workers bustled around, moving pallets, loading trucks, barely stopping to breathe. Ethan had been one of them once. But today he was something else. As he stepped through the main doors, flanked by Langford and a team of executives, heads turned. Supervisors whispered. Managers froze in place. They weren't expecting this. Langford didn't waste time. Get the workers together. Now. Within minutes, a crowd of employees gathered in the break room, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Ethan took a deep breath. And then he spoke. I know what you're thinking, Ethan said, scanning the room. Who the hell is this guy? Why is he here? A few chuckles. Some nods. I'll tell you why, Ethan continued. Because I used to be you. I worked in a place just like this. I busted my ass every day for a paycheck that barely covered rent. And I know what it's like when no one listens to you. The room went silent. Eyes locked onto him. But that changes today. Ethan glanced at Langford, who gave a small nod. I was hired to make sure you're heard. That conditions get better. That no one gets ignored anymore. This isn't just talk. I have direct access to Langford himself. If something is wrong, I will know about it, and I will fix it. A ripple of shock and hope spread through the room. And for the first time since this wild journey started, Ethan knew he had made the right choice. In the weeks that followed, Ethan dove into his new mission. He exposed violations. He fired corrupt managers. He implemented safety policies that actually protected workers. And most importantly, he listened. Word spread. Other warehouses started reaching out. Workers who had been silenced for years finally had a voice. Langford watched from a distance, his smirk replaced by something close to pride. Told you, he said one evening, watching Ethan lead a meeting. You were always meant for more. Ethan chuckled. Guess I just needed someone to see it. And as he walked through the warehouse floor, a place he had once belonged to but now had the power to change, he realized something. This wasn't just a job. It was a revolution. And he was just getting started. Loved this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Emma's Emotion Chronicles for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.